Welcome to episode 5 of season 11 of the Comm-UNITY podcast hosted by Persons Africa. For those that have been able to tune into the past 4 episodes, it's been an amazing journey reflecting on what philanthropy, community, diversity, and arts look like. Episode 5 talks about persons with disability and philanthropy. We dive deep into a recap from season 5 of the podcast and learn more about what this looks like from a different lens and perspective. Well, this morning I'm privileged to host an awesome member of the 360 leadership team at Persons Africa. She's passionate about people, about processes, and about awesomeness, okay? So today she'll be talking a lot about what is dear to her heart and the work that she does at Persons Africa. Dear listeners, I'm privileged to host Catherine Mugabo. Hi, Kathy, how are you?
I'm okay. You forgot my Mutesi name, but I'm really privileged to be here. To our dear listeners, this is a season that you should not miss because it provides you with a walk back to glimpse into what the past has looked like in terms of the different areas of, I prefer calling it generosity, because when we say philanthropy, people may be mistaken, but really generosity and philanthropy, it's one and the same thing. So I'm delighted to be just taking you back to remember some of the things we talked about regarding how people with disability do philanthropy in society.
Okay, so Catherine Mutesi Mugabo.
Yes.
Tell us about Kathy and the work that Kathy does at Persons Africa and what Kathy is passionate about. Who's Kathy?
Okay. Catherine Mutesi Mugabo. I am a generational mother because I have 2 adults, a teenager, and toddlers.
Wow.
So that's one of my permanent identities, and I'm very privileged to be in that space. It has its interesting dynamics to it. I'm a very introspective person because I also tend to be very expressive. And if you're that kind of person, if you do not have a reflective nature, then you easily run into trouble, and sometimes you don't even have the chance to correct that. So I'm a very introspective person. Very intentionally, I do that to think about how I live, what I say, how I say it, because, again, being expressive sometimes, many times we mean well, but sometimes we rub people the wrong way. So I know that I'm a very intentionally introspective person. I enjoy engaging with people. I tend to be very conversational. I have a silent and quieter side of me, but I think the dominant one is the conversational, expressive Kathy. And I love, my other thing is I really love thinking through creating options and alternatives for people, because we get stuck in life when we have no options. And that's one of the spaces I engage in. One of my strengths is ideation. So I am many things. Already you can tell that I'm very expressive, so I will not finish up Antonio's time. Yeah, but that's a side of me. The other parts can come later.
Well, I'm hosting you, so It's a privilege to have you express yourself. Feel free to tell us more, because I believe that the Comm-UNITY podcast exists for that exact reason. So, Kathy, in season 5, you dive deep into, persons with disability and aspects of philanthropy. And that's a very interesting angle. And I know that having been in the same space with you, this is something that you're passionate about and view more keenly than anyone I have ever known. So tell us more. Giving and generosity and persons with disability.
So first of all, I was introduced to the disability work by a wonderful friend and colleague of mine then, Catherine Townsend, Heidi, who was a program officer at Wellspring Advisors at the time.
Okay.
She introduced me to disability work, and I loved the intersection, because naturally I care about vulnerable people. I know that word is used, I think, and it can mean many things. But for me, it's people who are at risk or people who may be disadvantaged for one reason or another. And that's what vulnerability is about. And many times when you think about, in Uganda, the word for disability is vakateyamba. That word directly translated means those that cannot help themselves.
Okay.
Now, if you have interacted with people with a disability, like myself and many others, we know that that statement is not really true. It's a lie that not all people with a disability are helpless, because then when you say bakateyamba, it means they're always on the receiving end. They never give. But from season 5, we had so many stories of people from all categories. First of all, I wanted to maybe just to remind our listeners that disability is defined as really a person who may have an impairment. That impairment can be sensory, it can be intellectual, physical, or otherwise. I think we have 5 categories that are defined in the laws of Uganda.
Okay.
But that interaction, it only becomes a disability if there is limitation as the person interacts with their environment. So if I am a person, for example, with a psychosocial disability, which is a thing that you do not see, it doesn't mean that I am disabled because I have a psychosocial disability. Maybe you can say if I had a relapse and I'm in depression and I get mentally sick, ill, it means I need medication care. Just like if you get sick with malaria, you go to get treated. It doesn't mean that for the rest of your life you're labeled as a malaria something. So it's important to make that distinction that just because I'm a wheelchair user doesn't make me disabled. It becomes a disability when, if I'm in my wheelchair, I suddenly cannot go through that door because either there are steps, so I have to depend on somebody else to support me. So the disability comes in as you interact with your environment. It is caused by social factors, by the environment that we live in. If I'm a person with albinism, my having a lighter skin color or not having melanin in my skin in and of itself is not a disability. It is when my lack of melanin in my skin, if I go to the sun, it means I'm more prone, for example, to the sun rays impact. I easily get wounds that can easily become septic or cancerous because of the many other underlying factors because of the lack of melanin. But the skin color as an end of itself, it is not an issue. So it's really when you interact with the environment. So, and when Catherine first started working with me, I remember she told me that globally, even people have different cultures around disability.
Okay.
So if you're in New York and somebody's in a wheelchair and they're falling over, you don't just simply come and touch and try to help them. Because in any case, when you're not there, are you the one who has been helping? So part of it is cultural. So I learned that I needed first ask for permission if I traveled. And I needed to help somebody. Because remember, the mindset here is bakateyamba, those who cannot help themselves. But also naturally, our orientation as an African society is if I see somebody in need, many times even before asking, I will step in. I will see a child who is hungry and the first thing I think about is give them a bite. But we are learning today you can give a bite and somebody gets allergies and you will be sued. On the other side of the world, it's a completely different orientation. They have to first ask. So again, remember we're talking about interaction with the environment. So I learned that even if they are both wheelchair users, if I am here in Uganda, I can easily touch maybe somebody's wheelchair. But even then I learned that it's important to ask why. Because in disability, a wheelchair user, their wheelchair is their personal space. So if you just come and touch my wheelchair without asking permission, it's like you coming to hug me and maybe you touch my waist area, and you know how people can misunderstand that.
Yes.
So it's those nuances. And again, it's really around how do you navigate that, and you will see clearly that just being a wheelchair user is not disability in itself. It is the limitation that me being confined in that space, that is what becomes a disability. So I just wanted to sort of like do a bit of a recap there, a history lesson in that, and I'm really grateful for that orientation that was done mainly by Catherine Townsend.
Wow. So you've taken us through a masterclass. I would call it a masterclass on what disability is. And I'm trying to connect the thread again to generosity and community. You pointed out, one, understanding what disability is, understanding what the differences are in contexts. If I traveled outside Uganda or outside East Africa or even Africa, it could be different in different parts of the country. But then the aspect of how I know you mentioned, the environments and the social factors that are that are around us or that within which we operate. There are some biases and different aspects around persons with disability. However, we see that there's also another side where persons with disability are actually doing more for their communities and saying, you know what, I am, redefining what this could look like. And I know that season 5 captures bits and pieces of those. Would you like to?
Yes, happily so. So, for example, in season 5, we took a tour around the different acts of generosity and philanthropy that people living with disability have actually done, giving back. Opposed to the myth of Bakate Yamba. They are the ones now helping and supporting other people. We spoke, and I just wanted to do a very quick recap. For example, we spoke to persons with living with dwarfism, little people. We spoke to people with epilepsy, with people with cerebral palsy, people with spina bifida. And I'm doing this broad categorization just because each of these are doing things in their communities to give back, to support others, to build others, to grow and develop others, even with their disabilities. So we spoke with people who are blind, people with physical disability, people with vitiligo, people with epilepsy, people who are positively living with both HIV/AIDS and are also living with a disability. We spoke to deaf people. So this variety, you remember, disability is not homogeneous. It's a very diverse field, and this is just some of the people we spoke to. There are other categories that are not necessarily here. We have deaf, blind, and for example, I spoke to Joel in season 5. He's a young man with who lives with dwarfism. He's a little person, and he was sharing his experience working at KCCA, Kampala Capital City Authority. And he says he's working in this office where people, if it's, for example, it's lunchtime or mealtime, they'll go and maybe have a lunch for 2 hours. But for him, having gone through discrimination, knowing what it means to wait for a service, because little people, for example, they have issues with mobility. So they can't do big steps because they are definitely of shorter stature. They can't do high. So this chair would be maybe too high for them to work. So knowing that they can't stand for long, that was working at the back of his mind. Why should people wait? It will be very uncomfortable for them. So coming from his own experience as a person living with a disability, he said, no, I'll minimize the time people have to wait, whether they have a disability or they don't. So many times he stepped forward to do work for other people just to minimize the time people have to wait or keep standing. Wow. And he has done so many other. He's also the founder of the Foundation for Persons Living with Dwarfism up to today. And he has done that to be able to build the capacity and empower other little people and their families to be able to live independently. I spoke to somebody called Benon from Kabale who has built what he calls high stoves, understanding, for example, that for people living with epilepsy, fire flames is a trigger for people to get convulsions. So to address that, he said no. He came up with this idea. He started building what he calls raised stoves, where he's able to cover and conceal much of the fire. So that even if a person with epilepsy is cooking, because you also want to promote independent living, that you minimize the triggers, and in case a risk unfortunately still materializes, the raised charcoal stove, the person doesn't fall straight into the fire. And he went around the country building those raised charcoal stoves to protect people with epilepsy, but also their families, because it's very costly if you get burnt. So it has all these other costs embedded in it. So you see that it is the appreciating of their own experiences and thinking back, how do I support others? And not just people who have the same disability, but across disabilities, because the charcoal stoves they are working on are actually fuel efficient stoves. So they have been adopted by other people, and they're doing this in communities, supporting other people. So if we talk about Bakateyamba, that is not a Kateyamba kind of category of people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Another piece of the masterclass. Today I'm just wowed by, but I had as I had mentioned to you listeners, Kathy is so passionate about this subject. And if you haven't listened into season 5, this is your chance to just pause right there and go back to season 5 of the Comm-UNITY podcast and just start from season 1 and listen in depth to what Kathy is trying to recap today. So Kathy, a number of our listeners may be working with, supporting, or even could be one of our listeners, or more than one, could be a person with a disability. What would you want to say to them, those that are listening in, or those that will, have this transcribed into a form that they could, tap into? How would you encourage them to know that, one, they are givers, that which is upon them does not define who they are.
That's true.
Yeah. How would you encourage them?
Yeah, and we've already seen, so for every listener out there, I think it's important for us to remember that there are labels that if you have this known disability, then you're the person living with a disability. But the truth is that all of us live with a form of limitation.
Yes.
And if disability is a limitation with the environment, it means all of us, in one way or another, have a disability in that context. There are moments where I've needed to make tough decisions, and I needed what we usually call assisted decision making in disability, which is a thing people think is limited to people with psychosocial disability. That's fine. If I think I'm going to be sick, I can say, okay, I trust Antonio to make decisions for me before you take me into a hospital if I'm anticipating that I may get sick, mentally ill, because I'm a person who lives with a psychosocial disability. So we tend to think it's just for those people. But believe me, I do a lot of assisted decision making on a daily. So I want to remind us out there that all of us have a form of limitation, and we definitely, one way or another, we depend on others for something. And so for me, it's not even for any, so it's not even this categorization, the narrative that there is these people who have a disability. All of us have a limitation. And by that categorization, I think all of us have a form of disability. So what do I say to all of us? That it is important to think through how independently, I am for independent living. That if I were 100 years old and I needed to go to my bathroom, am I able to find my way there? So that I have my dignity. So if you are a human resource person who at civil society, imagine yourself, today you have your 2 legs walking. Tomorrow something happens, who knows? And you're not able to use your 2 legs for one reason or another. Maybe you're in a wheelchair or you're using clutches. Are you still able to go and navigate your environment? If you think universal design so that you make it easy for everybody to access spaces, to access information. So people with disability, it's important to provide information of what would make it easy for me to navigate and find my way around with as little dependency as possible. That is my major call is, can we provide information? Because there are times where people have wanted to support us, but they have no idea. How do I support you? Because people think, accessibility, it is equal to ramps. So someone goes and puts a ramp and they're like, sorted. But what about this other software? I am using a phone. I am now 45. I'm thinking, okay, I can't see this font. And I was thinking, I wish I had done IT. I would be thinking of bigger fonts. But bigger fonts is not just for people like me who can no longer read without my glasses at close range. It's also with people, for example, with intellectual disability. It is perhaps with young children who may not necessarily have this label of a disability, but it would be easier for them to read. So again, it is around creating easy access, easy understanding, easy navigation, that the designs we create, whether that is of buildings, of systems, mindsets, they are designs that can embrace and be inclusive of everybody. So inclusion is not just about, we have a board. Bring us 2 people with a disability. That is good, but it's not enough. Inclusion is beyond that. It's about our mindset. What do we think? How do we think? How do we budget? How inclusive are our budgets? How inclusive are our product designs, our innovations? So my fellow people with the limitations, as we interact with the environment, let us provide information and ideas on how life can actually be more accessible, so that as much as possible, all of us live independently. I am here wanting to be financially independent, that I do not have to worry about spending money. That is my biggest disability areas right now. So if you're out there, so I'm telling you, if you're out there, for example, and you can support me to get financially independent, you said, that is one of the things that I would really ask. Where do we need help? Let's be expressive, because sometimes people don't know how better to support us. So
wow. Financial independence, a whole different angle, a whole need for another episode to discuss this further. Kathy, any parting words? I know you've sort of said and summed up a couple of things, but is there any 1 or 2 things that you'd want to say as we, conclude our time together today?
Yes. So one thing, that all humans have really a form of limitation, because remember, disability is when you have a limitation, we are interacting. So I'm inviting all of us to think through what are the limitations, and open your mind beyond physical. What are the intellectual? What are the, if you're thinking of a product in the philanthropy department, as you go out to the communities to work with people, can we think about what could be the limitation? Is it even mindset? I think for me, the biggest are the mindsets. Because then it's easy when you see someone in a wheelchair, you presume. If you see somebody who is expecting they're crossing the road, you can easily make some decisions. But there are so many limitations that are invisible. So that requires us to exercise reasonable accommodation, assume goodwill, give people a benefit of doubt. And so before you conclude that I think Antonio doesn't love me or like me because he has done this, engage, inquire, and learn, so we can inform, and together we can be able to grow. Because again, limitations are everywhere and they are part of life, and they are not a bad thing. They are a starting place and a birthplace for innovation. They are a birthplace for collaboration, for learning, for mutual learning, for affirmation. And we all have the opportunity, in the spirit of supporting each other, to be able to say, we can remove barriers. We can exercise reasonable accommodation. And I'm not saying reasonable accommodation only the way the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities says it around. If you're a finance person, enable people to work, put in place, invest in what they need. The big thing that we need to really work with, mindsets. Can we be self-aware that there are limitations? And oftentimes, I think, regardless of whether you have a disability or not, there are limitations, and we always work with a limited set of information. So let's free ourselves to be open to engage, to ask questions. The worst that can happen is you will not get the answer you're looking for, but you'll have done your part. You'll have asked the questions.
Wow. Oh, dear listeners, Catherine Mutesi Mugabo, I'm sure you definitely are as excited as I am to even go back and listen into season 5 once again. Kathy, it's been a pleasure hosting you. I look forward to your book launch, because from what we've shared today, there's a book that is coming out, or a position paper. I don't know, so many other things that are destined to come out. It's been a pleasure hosting you. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to the next episode. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.